Hi, guys.
Hello.
Welcome back to Spooky Sleuths. Today we have a very special guest with us. We have Miss Carrie Pierce, and she is here to tell us all about her mother's story, and we'll kind of let her take it from here.
I'm Sammy.
And I'm Nicole.
And we are Spooky Sleuths.
It's wonderful to be with you ladies today. I appreciate this opportunity. My mom was a jazz singer in the 50s, and she recorded under the name Laurie Allen. And she lived and worked in Hollywood and also Chicago in the mid to late 50s. And in doing so, had many interactions with Mafia figures, and as most people did back then in shows.
Right.
And so I grew up hearing these incredible stories, and it was amazing to me that she actually survived, because she moved at a young age in her early 20s from a small Texas town to Chicago, and began to sing in the nightclubs, all of the bigger nightclubs in Chicago. And she was extremely naive and precious and sweet and innocent, and fell into the world of Mafia and was surrounded by hits and prostitution and those kind of things, which she did not participate in. I do want to say that, but she was exposed to.
Yeah, no judgment if she would have, though.
No. I mean, she was fun and everything, but not. But so I grew up hearing these stories, and Mom wrote a serialized version of her experiences that was modernized, and it dealt with sex trafficking in the music industry, and it was called Becoming Billie, and it was serialized in a women's magazine many years ago. And she put a lot of effort and work into that. And in the meantime, her recordings from the 50s had been rediscovered, and her CD Paradise was released again in 2004. And it went all over the world and received a wonderful acclaim. And Mom became very ill a couple of years ago as we were moving. She was my best friend, and she passed away in my arms 3 years ago in February. And the day it was I think we all encounter experiences in our lives that completely undo us at some point in our life. We all go through that. This one was mine. I had lost my dad in 2014 to dementia, and that was a horrible experience and tough to watch. Mom and I took care of him.
That's one of the hardest diseases to watch somebody suffer through.
It's nightmarish and hellish and horrible. Absolutely. And it sounds like you know that firsthand, and I'm sorry that you do.
Well, I know it from a nursing perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in a nursing home for a year with patients that suffered from dementia, and now family. It's very sad.
I'm sorry. You lose them every day in increments. And so Mom and I took care of my dad, and it took him about 5 years to slide into the last awfulness of Lewy body dementia. And so we decided, after years of grief, we were going to move to a new community and start a new life with what was left of her time on earth. By this time, she was in her late 80s. And as we were moving, she went into kidney failure and was diagnosed with, she was just eaten up with multiple myeloma. And we didn't have anywhere to go. We'd already sold our house of 30 years. And so we had no choice but to move anyway. So we moved to a beautiful new community. And 2 months after we got here, she died in my arms, and I was by myself. I was like, whoa, this is.
I guess this is really starting over. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole entire world as I knew it was completely gone. And when you watch somebody take their last breath, and you know this from your nursing, when you watch the soul leave the body, it is an astounding experience. And the day before she died, she was looking out the window at the hospice facility. And I said, "What are you thinking about, Mom?" And she said, "I know this is vain, but I really hope as a writer that you will one day do something with Becoming Billie, because that was like the thing that I was really proud of that I had worked on. And I would just like to think that it maybe will live on." And so I held her hand and I hugged her, and we looked out the window together as the sun was setting. And that was my deathbed promise to her, was that I would take the notes of her once serialized story, and I would turn it into rather a gripping novel on the sex trafficking in the music industry and those kind of things. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And that's who Mom was. But before we get to that, and I think as fitting as your show topics are, just talking for a moment about her death experience. There was definitely another spirit, another presence in that room with us while she was dying. And
Wow.
it was loving and palpable. And there was an absolute certainty that we were not alone. And yes, you can.
Positive or negative, you can absolutely feel that energy.
This was incredibly loving. And Mom had never spoken in tongues. She had never done anything like that. And the last several hours before she died, she sat straight up in bed and had a conversation in tongues with this presence in the room. And I knew she was speaking to them and they were speaking back to her. And I sat there in the corner and I watched this.
You were like intruding, like, oh.
Yeah. And I watched the conversation, and she was very conversational, and she would say things and then wait, and whatever was in the room was answering her, because she would nod and she would look and she would respond. And this went on for a few hours while she was moving through the death process. And she died when the nurses they still said she had a good 6 to 8 hours left. And so many things in her death process were so beautifully orchestrated, including we ended up in the state's only in-state patient hospice facility. Never even heard of it. It was like a country club. It was absolutely gorgeous. And the staff took such loving care of her. And it was a beautiful facility. And
they're not all like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, they're not. But this was really, and we just fell into it. It was just like these doors opened once we were told she was dying, and it was imminent. These doors just started opening for us. We were in a community we didn't know, and so I had dozed off on the couch because you don't sleep when you're in the throes of your most cherished person dying. You don't sleep, you don't eat. And I had finally dozed off on the couch at 4:00 in the morning, the couch in her room, after watching her for hours communicate with this presence. And at 6:45 that morning, I felt something take me by the arms and move me. I didn't walk to the side of her bed. It gently moved me to the side of her bed. And she was guppy breathing, which I had never seen before. And so I looked down at her and I called the nurse and I said, "My mom is doing something with her face. I don't know what's going on." And she said, "I'll be there in a minute. I'll be there in a second." And in a matter of seconds, she came in the room and she said, "Oh, she's guppy breathing." And she explained it to me. And she said, "Your mom is totally at peace, but you're down to about 6 hours now. And why don't you get in bed with her and just be with her?" Mm-hmm. And so I said, "Well, let me go to the bathroom," which was in her room, and I will. So I ran in and did my quick business. I was in there about 30 seconds and I came back out, and the nurse put covers over me and got me positioned with Mom in bed. And she said, I'll check back on you in a little while. And she got to the front door and she stopped and she turned around and she said, I tell you what, why don't I just sit down in this chair so that you're not afraid? I'll stay with you for a little bit. And I said, that would be lovely.
Yeah.
And so the nurse sat down and she said, yeah, you're down to about 6 hours now. And I looked at Mom and I brushed her hair off her face. And I said, my last words to my mom, I said, oh, my sweet, sweet girl, I love you. I just love you so. And she opened her eyes, looked me straight in the eye, and took her last breath and left. And I said, oh, my God, she's gone. And the nurse looked at me like, what are you talking about? She's not gone. You've got 6 hours. I just looked at her. She's not gone. And she leaned over and she looked over and she said, oh, my God, she's gone. And I said, I know. And she said,
I said that.
Just said that. And she said, this is where I'm supposed to take out my stethoscope and announce the time of death, but I don't need to do that. She's gone. And she looked at me and she said, I have never seen this. I have been a nurse for 30 years. I have never seen a death like this, ever, ever. And she said she was waiting for you to get back in bed with her. We were so close. And it was like, I always knew we were so close that God would never make me live without her. And I always knew that 2 minutes after my mom died, he would be kind and take me too, because he knew I would just be a shell of myself if she wasn't in my life. We were soulmates. And so I got ready because I thought, okay, I'm next. Here it comes.
Oh my goodness.
And I stood there because I thought he's going to take me any second. I'm going to keel over dead because he knows to leave me behind. And I sat there and I watched the clock. And after about 10 minutes, I actually said, son of a bitch.
Yeah. It's like, we had a deal, man.
He's going to make me do it. He's going to make me do this. Son of a bitch. And lo and behold, here I am 3 years later. But it's, and so this has nothing to do with why we're here to talk. But the more I started thinking about her passing, the more I wanted to share with your listeners and your viewers. That was the most up close and personal death experience I've ever had. My father's death was horrible and violent and awful because of the dementia. And my mom's death was so beautiful. There was a palpable, loving presence in that room that took her home. And she saw it, and it ministered.
I know, I had chills the whole time.
Well, but I mean, it ministered to me too. And I had never heard this until a year after Mom died. We always referred to this move to the new community as our exodus, because we were moving from a place that had become very dark and crime ridden, and we weren't safe. So we called this move our exodus. And I was listening to a talk after Mom died, and they said in every exodus, the angel of death has a big role to play. And I was like, what? I'd never heard that before.
Hey, why are we using that word?
Yeah, it's true. And then I heard another lecture where they said the angel of death is so misunderstood. And I think it's Azrael is the angel of death. But the angel of death appears in many religions in the exact same description. And he's talked about the same way. The descriptions are all the same. But they said, not only does the angel of death carry your loved one to peace in the afterlife, the other part of his job is to then return and minister to the ones left behind. And I had never heard that before.
Yeah, me either. That's new for me.
Yeah, well, it was for me too. And when I thought back on Mom's passing, I realized that's who was in the room with us. And he very much ministered to me. He carried me to her bedside when it was time. It was very gentle. He comforted me. And he told her, and there's not a doubt in my mind what was going to be happening. He gave her instructions, and that's what that conversation was. He was explaining to her, this will happen, and this, and then we will go here and we will do this. And she was receiving her instructions, and she was asking her questions, and he was answering her. I mean, I sat there and I watched all of that, and I heard all of that, and it was really life-changing.
Absolutely.
Especially
so I'm related to our
nutty.
I'm sorry, what?
I said at first whenever something like that happens, you're like, oh, are they going a little nutty? And then you're like, no, there's something more happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I've rambled, and this is not what we're here to talk about.
Great.
No, you're good. But, unfortunately, she left us, but she left you a legacy that you have to speak about, and you've got that you're putting out there. Her story.
Well, yes. And Mom was very interesting. There was a lot of magic to her. She saw life differently. She was a singer in the jazz industry in Chicago, which is a notoriously tough city. She was discovered in Chicago. They thought enough of her talent to fly her to Hollywood to make an album. And she did all of this with no family support. And this was in the 50s, where good girls did not do this kind of thing. Her family did not support her. And so, she was pretty much out there in her naivete, just ripe for the picking. And so what we're really here to talk about today is her Chicago experiences, which I am writing Becoming Billie, the novel, around. And some of the things that she shared with me that she experienced firsthand with the Mafia people of the time. So
I have to be completely honest. The only thing I really know about the Mafia is what we see in movies and what I read about in my smut books. So I'm really interested to hear.
Well, they're probably actually accurate. The Mafia exists today too, but now many countries have their own Mafia. It used to be Irish Mafia, it used to be Italian Mafia, and now there's Russian and all sorts of different ones. The Mafia in Chicago at the time was a very kind of accurately portrayed in the Godfather. And so what is funny is, I'll tell you the funny stories first that Mom shared with me, and then we'll get to some of the more brutal ones. But Mom was taken into care, just happenstance, while she was out in Chicago, coming and going and doing her thing. She was poor and struggling. She was a beautiful woman, so she also modeled. She did what she could to make ends meet. Short of prostitution, she did not do that. But there were two numbers runners that, for some reason, took it upon themselves to kind of protect her, and because they knew she was just dead meat. I mean, she was just so naive. She was just dead meat. And so these two number runners, one was named Lefty and the other was named...
Of course they were. Of course his name was Lefty.
So yeah, there you have it. Lefty and Itchy. And so they ran numbers, and so they were bagmen for the mob. And so I asked Mom one time when we were talking, I said, well, tell me about these guys. And she said, well, they were always very good to me. They always kept me out of trouble. And I just thought they were nice guys. I didn't really understand what they did. And I said, well, you knew they were numbers runners. What did you think that was? And she said, I thought they just picked up bingo cards and bingo numbers from church to church. And I mean, that's, my mom. I was like, no, honey, that's, and she said, well, I know that now, But so I then asked her, I said, well, how did you think Itchy got his name? And she said, I thought he had a skin condition. And I said, itchy trigger finger. And she said, I know that now. So I was like, Mom, however, did you survive Chicago? The jazz, yeah. And so they did amazing things for my mom, who was starving and struggling and trying to be a successful jazz singer. She had an appendix surgery at Thanksgiving one time, and no family. And she came to Thanksgiving night in her bed, horribly sick from the anesthesia. And when she opened her eyes, all around her hospital bed was an entire full course Thanksgiving meal, an entire turkey, a chocolate cake, dressing, a bottle of wine. I mean, everything. She was surrounded by a full course Thanksgiving meal, and all she wanted to do was puke in the trash can. She was so nauseous, and the smell of food just made it so bad. She looked over, and in the corner, Lefty was sitting there, and he said, "We didn't want you to be alone, and tonight, it's Thanksgiving." And they had gotten her this entire meal thinking that when she came out of her surgery, she'd be hungry and she could have Thanksgiving dinner. Well, she ended up giving it to all the doctors and nurses because all she wanted to do was throw up. But I mean, so these guys really
good guys, even with all the morally gray stuff.
Well, I guess if you were lucky enough to not be on the business end of Lefty and Itchy, I guess they could be. But the flip side of that is, well, one more funny story before I tell you the bad stuff. They called my mom Fum. That was their nickname for her. And I guess when you're dealing with Mafia people, you don't ask too many questions too often. And so months of this went by. And they're always saying, "Hi, I'm Fum," and "How you doing, I'm Fum," and "What's going on, I'm Fum." And so she was sitting there at the lunch counter one day in downtown Chicago, and Itchy or Lefty came in. I don't remember which one it was, and called her Fum. And finally she said, "You guys have been calling me this for months, and why do you call me Fum?" And he said, "Well, that's easy, because anytime anybody asks you where you're from, you say, from Texas." and so that whole Mafia called her Fum. But the bad side of life surrounded by the mob at that time was Mom lived in an apartment building in Chicago. It was the only place she could afford the rent. And it was not a bad apartment building, but it was pretty much where the gangsters kept their malls, MOLLS, their squeezes, their girlfriends, their mistresses. And so she was surrounded by a lot of stuff that, she didn't want to know about. And being in that presence could have easily gotten her in trouble.
Right.
So she finally decided, and she had a beautiful neighbor. It was a young woman that modeled with her. They were about the same age. And this woman was incredibly beautiful and had an extremely promising career. She had just signed with one of the largest, most world-renowned, highly respected modeling agencies. And Mom realized she needed to get out of that apartment building. And so she left. And about 24 hours later, there was a couple waiting for the elevator, and they kept pushing the button, and the elevator didn't come. And they were standing there talking. And finally, the elevator came and the doors opened. And this girl had just been totally filleted in the elevator. And her face had been sliced up, and she had been butchered in the elevator. And, Mom missed that by 24 hours. And apparently what had happened was this woman was either about to talk, or she was having an affair, and her gangster made man boyfriend found out about it, needed to shut her up, because, when you're having pillow talk outside of your other pillow talk, it can become very dangerous. And so she was died a horrible death in that elevator. So, there are sweet, funny stories of the mafia at that time,
but the
and
reality is your mom's lucky to have made it out alive.
yeah, very, very much so, very much so, and to have been so naive, to have not been sucked into the world of prostitution at that time.
Yeah,
Because just even unaware. I mean, just like what we see today, there are so many young people, young women and men, that get sucked into these, like, thing with P. Diddy and Epstein
right.
Island and all of that. You're just invited to parties, and then before you know it, you're drugged, and then before you know it, these horrible things are happening, and then you can't get out. And so, then it was just mafia controlled prostitution. But today it's worldwide sex trafficking, but it's the same kind of setup and scenario. And so that's very disturbing. Basically Lefty and Itchy died horrible deaths. I think Lefty was gunned down in a thing that went awry. And from my understanding, or I may have this backwards, perhaps Itchy was, but one of the other ones, the other guy died in an airplane in mid-flight when the plane blew up. So I'll just leave that there, because that doesn't happen very often. So
No.
So they both met their demise. And Mom was singing at a club in Chicago that had to pay protection money every week. And she was performing, she would be performing, and they were down in a basement. So I have this kind of scene written out in the novel.
Yeah.
She would be singing, and the collector would come for the protection money. And it was very like Luca Brasi in The Godfather. Mom said it was a mountain of a man, and he wore the big 50s trench coats with the big shoulder pads and the big hat pulled real low. And she said he was like a planet in orbit when he would come in. He was so big, he would fill up the entire staircase coming down into the club. And she said he was so big, he would blot out the light.
Oh, wow.
He was that big. And he never talked to anybody. He would walk straight to the bookkeeping office. He would pick up his envelope, put it in and leave. Did that every week. That was their payoff for protection. And Mom saw the books, and you will have to bleep this probably, but in the books, every week would be this amount of payoff money and the name MF. Well, MF did not stand for Mafia, and MF did not stand for Massey Ferguson. So I'll leave that up to you for what, but that's how they logged it in the club's books. MF, mother effer, and the amount of money that they had to pay for protection. And it was every week. And so these kind of stories were something to hear, and they fascinated me. And then fast forward into my own life, oddly enough, at the same age, Mom left Texas and went to Chicago for her jazz career. I left Texas at the same age, and I went to Las Vegas and to Hollywood for the film industry. And so I was young and naive and in 20, and I moved first to Vegas to work on a big network production, which was filmed on location there. And I apprenticed as a makeup artist. And I saw a lot of things and encountered a lot of things back in the 80s that horrify me now to realize how close I came. Because even back then, sexual trafficking was going on, and it had exploded and become more so, because by then it was not just prostitution. You were sex trafficked out of the country and never heard from again.
Right.
And used until there was nothing left of you, which is pretty much what it is today. But case in point, when I was first in Vegas, I would walk 3 and 4 miles a day for my exercise. And I would go up and down the strip. I would walk the whole length of the strip before I went to work. And I was at work one day with the makeup artist that I was apprenticing with, and he had won many, many Emmys, and he'd been around forever. And he said, I passed you today on the strip on your walk. And I want to make this very clear to you, and I'll never forget this. He said, you need to understand. And I think Vegas has improved now. So this is not a reflection on today's Vegas, but this is a reflection on the Vegas when I was there. He said, Vegas is a transient town. And, he could tell that didn't really mean anything to me. And he said, if you get attacked or you get knifed or you get shot on the street, people will step over you to get to the buffet. And you need to understand that. And if you're walking on these streets with your little Walkman on and you're listening to your tunes, you're going to get yanked into a car and you're never going to be seen again. And so it was things that I had to think about that Mom, had to learn too.
Right.
And it was kind of weird all those decades later that I would be living this. And I also, I wonder about this woman often. And it horrifies me sometimes when I think about it. There was a very precious Asian woman that was handled the baccarat pit in the hotel where I worked. Mm-hmm. And part of my job when I wasn't working on the production as a way to bring in extra income, I would model for this kind of prestigious evening wear boutique that was in the big hotels. And so for about 4 hours every day, I would wear these expensive evening gowns and I would walk the casinos and the buffets and model the outfits. And she said, you're always welcome down here. We have lovely Texas oil men that come and they want to buy their wives beautiful things. If you ever come here, though, and I start waving you off, turn around as fast as possible and get out of here. Because that means we've got some evil, evil people down here. Do not come in. And so she, I said, okay, that was our agreement. So anytime I would start her way, she'd usually smile and, I'd come down and the Texas oil men were, they'd place their orders for the evening gowns. There was only one time, and it was so terrifying that shortly after that I quit. And then I also never saw her again. And I sometimes wonder what happened. I started toward the pit, and she was surrounded by men in suits, very expensive suits. And she looked up and saw me coming, and the color drained from her face. And she looked at me with a look of abject horror on her face and twitched her head. And I immediately turned around and left. And I realized what she was telling me, that these were either traffickers or mobsters of the day, and that they would eat me for lunch if I didn't get out of there. But I also realized she put her life on the line, because if they had looked up and seen her doing that, they could have assumed she was throwing the game. They could have assumed any number of things and whacked her. And, so I left, and I thought, I don't think this little bit of income is worth risking being trafficked or turned into a meat pie for. So I quit. But I mean, things you don't think about and that you have to think about. And it's getting more so. I mean, you have to be mindful of what you drink, what you eat, what you consume out in public, who you're around, who you let your guard down around.
So you talked about how your mom was young and naive and just kind of fell into the mafia. What happened to make her realize she was involved with the mafia, and how did she get out, basically?
Well, that's a good question. I think after Lefty and Itchy's demise, their unfortunate, timely demise, that left her exposed
Yeah.
because the two, not that she trusted them or cozied up to them, but she knew that they understood she was naive and gullible and in danger.
If she
And
felt like
once,
they were protecting her.
well, yeah,
And
but
then,
I don't think in a sense that she thought, oh, I love these guys, I can trust them. I mean,
well,
I
no,
think,
just
yeah,
yeah.
but so there was an element there of like a little protective bubble, a little bit of bubble wrap there that
Yeah.
surrounded her. She ended up getting tangled up with a not very nice man. And then that ended up kind of propelling her out of that realm in getting away. Also, when her album fell apart and was not released, it was such a crushing blow to her because jazz was her first love. And I think it really deflated her. And she ended up not being able to sing again for a very long time because it just destroyed her. And she then just turned to her modeling. And at that time, I mean, they were flying her Florida and different places to do modeling, but it was she had a young child. My sister, who's 7 years older than I am, she's got a different dad, and mom had to focus on caring for her child, and so that meant moving back to Texas. So I think life and divine providence got her out of that. And she did go on to sing again, and her voice was resonant and beautiful. I think it had aged well. I think older women, after they have lived life, especially with jazz, the genre of jazz, when they sing from their older, more experienced voice, it is so compelling. And my mom's voice became very much that way. She was singing in her 80s. And I think she was singing her best because she had lived those life experiences in those jazz songs when earlier she hadn't lived them, but she understood how to deliver the lyric. Yeah, so it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. So now we can talk about some of the sex trafficking that happened. I know you touched on the different women that they would have in this apartment building. So you can just take it away.
Well, that has always been around. It is the oldest profession in terms of prostitution, is always referred to as the oldest profession. That doesn't necessarily mean the women that were in it chose it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere along the line, it became sex workers. Like that made it less lascivious. And I think, if anything, it has made it more dangerous because it's taken the truth out of it. So that's my personal feeling about that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When women are, or men even today, boys and children are now trafficked in huge, vast, very disturbing numbers. When you take a human being and you reduce them down to just the function of their genitals, nothing good is ever going to come from that.
Right.
And I think when you look at the truth of the numbers of children that have disappeared in this country, it's like staggering numbers. Hundreds of thousands of children are missing. They're somewhere. Where are they? And we as a society need to start asking that question. And they're somewhere. And granted, a lot of them are no more because that world is so pervasively dark. And now you factor in what's going on with Satan worship, satanic cults. Those are very prevalent. when I was out in Hollywood in the 80s, I don't think it's not news to anybody that lived and worked out in Hollywood that there's satanic activity going on out there.
Mhm.
You can't be out there on a regular basis and not know it. And when I was working on special effects, I was a film and TV special effects makeup artist. I would read scripts that they were doing things to women in these films that didn't have anything to do with the story. It was totally gratuitous torture. And they wanted the makeup effects and the torture to be as gruesome and graphic as possible. It didn't have anything to do with the plot. What was that about? And it finally got to the point where the scripts I was reading became so disturbing that I just realized I can't do this.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I love a good horror movie and a good, mystery suspense. But whenever, and I see it happen quite often, there's the sexualization is added for, like you said, like it doesn't help the plot. It is just,
it's gratuitous.
yeah.
And sometimes it is there as a ritual because it needs to be in there for some sort of ritual that they know about, but the audience doesn't know about.
Right, which eventually makes sense. But a lot of times anymore, it's just, oh, here's a naked woman. Just
yeah, and that's money. So if you follow the money trail, that will always take you to what is actually the truth. And the truth of the matter is coming out. And I mean, when the stuff about Diddy is released, it is going to be so
it's going to
horrific.
change everything in the entertainment industry.
Not just the entertainment industry. By the time Diddy is released, the truth about all of that, and the Epstein files are released, but you are correct. It will take down the entire entertainment industry, music, film, TV. It will take down sports, and it will take down DC. And that is the world that we're living in today. And I don't think the average consumer in public going on in their day-to-day life, trying to just put food on the table, I don't think
they realize what's about to happen.
Yeah, that we're prepared to hear what we're going to hear.
Yeah.
And there's a tremendous amount of satanic activity involving sex trafficking now. There is a tremendous amount of I would say sex trafficking on its own is horrible enough, but then when you couple it with satanic occult practices, it becomes even more horrific.
Right. They're buying these people, and not only are they buying people, which is an issue in and of itself, then they're using these people to perform these rituals that they have not consented to, and they generally don't make it back from that.
Oh, ever. Yeah. And what does boggle my mind are the people that have been there, and the small handful of people that have been there. They have seen it. They have participated in it, not by choice, by force.
Right.
And now they are trying desperately to tell people the truth. That takes a special kind of bravery. And I mean, I can sit here and write my little book, and I'm trying to make it as compelling and good and enticing and well written as possible. But it's still a fictionalized accounting.
Right.
But when you have people in today's world that have been there and done that and lived it, and they are trying to tell people, and I mean, I don't know how these people function. I don't know how, as a human being, your psyche stays intact after having been in the bowels of hell.
Right. I don't even know if I could call it survival mode. It's wild.
And as a nurse, with your nursing background, you know how fragile the human body and the human psyche is.
Oh, yeah. We worked in substance abuse for years.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times whenever people are trafficked, it's with the use of drugs. It's with it's all tied together. It is
listening
crazy
to our patients talk about how they got involved with just drug use. And a lot of times it stems from some form of childhood trauma.
Yep.
I very vividly remember listening to a patient describe being sex trafficked, and it broke my heart.
Yeah.
And then to
And-
cope with being trafficked,
Mhm.
that's why they turn to the needle. That's why they turn to all of that. So that
Well, it's kind of two-pronged because the drugs most of the time that they use to get these people vegetative enough to traffic them, they're addictive. So, they're automatically addicting these people in order to keep them under control.
And just because they get out from underneath of that doesn't mean that addiction stops. That's not how addiction works
It's a lifelong battle.
Not at all. And then you have the damage to the psyche. So it becomes a self-medicating, much like alcoholism. But you bring up an excellent point. There are a lot of us out here that have been molested as children by family members, by friends, by teachers. And granted, that is a different form of sex abuse and sex trafficking, but the end result in some cases is kind of the same. Guilt, shame. And when that stuff is not addressed at a very profound level with counseling and with working through your issues and feeling your feelings, it drives you and it owns you. And I think there is a tremendous cycle, especially in this country right now, of addiction, whether it's alcohol or fentanyl. People are numbing, and they're trying to numb for a reason. They're numbing things for a reason because things aren't either being addressed or they can't stand the pain of addressing them. And getting back to what we are going to learn, by the time all of this is said and done, we are going to know things that we will not even be able to handle. Yeah. And I think there will be people having a really hard time with what they're going to expose.
Oh, I'm sure. I can just imagine it's going to rock worlds of the people involved and of just your everyday innocent bystander that's going to learn this. And
I mean, the organizations we've contributed to, the movies we've watched, the musicians and rock stars we've idolized, the sports figures we've idolized, the actors we've loved for decades, they're going to be exposed, some of them as pedophiles. And pedophilia is huge.
It's ridiculous. Like, I can remember, oh gosh, I don't remember what triggered it, but everything came out about like the Pizza Gate and all of that came out, and I deep dive into so many things and saw more things than I ever wanted to see or read, because I wound up on a part of the internet you're not supposed to be on.
Right.
And I was prepared for that. And I can't imagine whenever it's just thrown in our faces on the 6 o'clock news, because that's how it's going to happen. There will be
it won't be on the 6 o'clock news because they're part of it, but it'll be. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it will come out, and I am grateful for alternative media sources today, because I think they're the ones that are driving the story. The mainstream media is covering it up. Right.
Oh, yeah, they're not even talking about it.
No. And if anything, we should wrap our heads in tinfoil and we're nut jobs, because, like you said, you're out there researching the truth of what's really going on, and they don't want you to know about it. And they certainly don't want you to talk about it. So bravo to you. And it does bring up a point. And in researching this book, I'm having to do the same thing. I'm having to listen to things. I'm having to spend a lot of time looking at the P. Diddy stuff and listening to the audios. And I've had to hear things I did not want to hear.
Right. It's awful.
Yeah. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
I'm working on writing a case right now where I'm having to listen to trial testimony about people describing the sexual and physical abuse that they went through. And it is just heartbreaking. It's really hard to hear. And I think, as prepared as we think we may be for all of this stuff to come out, I think it's even going to hit us hard.
Right.
Yeah. But, I commend you both for being brave enough to do this, because if it wasn't for your willingness and the stuff I'm having to listen to in order to understand what it is I need to write for Becoming Billie, a novel, if we weren't willing to do that, yeah, I think we have and I don't mean this to sound like patting ourselves on the back, or aren't we special? Right. I don't feel it that way. There are certain people that are called to do certain things in this battle of good versus evil, light versus dark. And I think you are being called to bring to light the things that you're bringing to light. And the fact that you're willing to do that deep digging and read the hard things and listen to the hard things and look at the pictures, that's going to be very important. And it's a very important task that you're being called to. And I hope that you understand, A, that it's important, and B, that it's certainly commendable that you're doing it. So
thanks.
You're welcome.
I just made my head so big, like I'm not going to be able to walk up out of this basement. Like, yeah,
that's not good.
No, but exactly. It takes all kinds to run the world, and it takes all kinds to be able to dig through the all kinds.
Yeah, indeed. Well said. And they say it takes all kinds, but I'm to the part where I'm starting to wonder why, as I look at some of these people out there doing some of the things they do. I kind of wonder why.
It's like, are we sure it takes all kinds? Because I don't think we need that kind.
Not really. But I do feel we are very much in a battle of light versus dark. Mm-hmm. And good versus
as everything's been coming out in bits and pieces over the last few years. People are starting to question things that before we wouldn't have.
Right.
And
I almost too late.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that.
You know, I sometimes think I wish we could go back to a kinder, gentler time, but the truth of the matter is there was not, in truth, a kinder, gentler time. We were better hidden, and we were extremely naive, and we were numbed into complacency. And you know, when we were in the 70s and all of that, in the 80s and whatever, it was going on. We just had the luxury of looking away or pretending like it wasn't. It's been going on.
You didn't talk about it. Yeah,
ever.
It didn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember when I was little and they first started putting the supposedly lost children on the milk cartons. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember when that first started. And I remember when I was little thinking, what's this about? You know, where's this coming from?
It wasn't necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, we've certainly gone down a lot of rabbit holes.
Yeah, we have. Like, what does Billie Holiday have anything to do with this?
I don't know. I have to go ask myself that now. Good heavens. No. So anyway, to answer that question, that is a good question. Becoming Billie, and again, it's Becoming Billie, a novel, not the young reader book that's out there. There's a reason for it, but I can't explain it because it gives the plot away. It is a tool that is used in the book for the purpose of getting these young women pulled in. Mm-hmm. So it does serve a purpose. Billie Holiday does serve a purpose in the plot line of this book. I can't tell you much more than that because it will ruin the plot line of the book. I know. I'm sorry. But there is a reason.
Wait till December at this point, or are we still waiting till April and get surprised in December?
Well, I'm pushing as hard as possible. I think the cover is going to be beautiful. I'm working with the artist now, and we have the concept for the cover. I need to write the a beginning piece about my promise to mom so that people understand why the book was written and where it came from.
Yeah.
And I'm
It's gonna be
starting.
hard for you.
It is. Yeah.
That's going to be a hard one.
Yeah. And I'm sitting with it now because I know it's coming and praying about it a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm up to the 13th chapter. And I'm only at about 27,000 words right now. I suspect it's going to be about a 60,000 word book by the time I'm through. So I have basically given up all my life until December 1st, and I'm doing nothing but writing because I have to get this.
Very fortunate you were able to meet with us.
Yeah.
You're right.
Go.
I wouldn't have missed this or anything. But so that is the push. To get the book done because, we thought it was just going to be a lovely, interesting, very carefully crafted book on sex trafficking in the music industry. And then all of this P. Diddy stuff started blowing up and the PR people are like, we need this now. So
Right, absolutely.
Now.
The world needs it now.
But this has been great fun. I've really enjoyed this, and I thank you for the questions you've asked and for your interest. And it's just been delightful.
And we're gonna put some sex trafficking links down in the description of the video.
Right.
Some informational ways to get help, anything like that may have the chance to reach someone.
And this might be triggering
for survivors.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I would like to also suggest that maybe you look into also posting some things for parents about how to keep their children safe online. It's so disturbing what our children, our young children are exposed to online. And the online world is awash in predators.
Listen, the online world was ridiculous whenever it was first coming out, like from the get-go.
Right.
Like, I remember being 12 years old and being in chat rooms I should not have been in.
Yeah.
Because that was a cool thing to do.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about those things and two, and this is a topic for another time, I also feel that way about dating sites.
Yeah.
I once interviewed.
You never had to be on a dating site.
No, but I have
married
read
a high
enough.
school sweetheart.
I
get it.
You're so blessed to have had that. I interviewed one time. I had a radio show one time years ago, and I interviewed an FBI profiler. And she was fascinating because she said, let's break this down by percentage, what's actually on a dating site. And by the time she got through removing this predator and this type of psychopath and this kind of predator, and there were about, and then men on there and women on there that were actually married, just looking to fling.
Right.
By the time she got through removing all of those things, legitimately, there were about 3%.
Wow.
3%, or somewhere 3 to 5% of that time were legitimate. Yeah, and people don't realize that it is a wash in predators, and I just don't understand how in today's world, and it's easy, I'm not passing judgment on people because all it takes is one moment where your guard is down, one moment where you're vulnerable. So I'm not passing judgment, and God knows. After mom died, and I think especially people that are in deep grief are extremely vulnerable.
Right.
When you are vulnerable, whether you're ill, whether you're struggling, whether you're lonely, whether you're in grief, predators can smell you from 10,000 miles away.
Oh,
and
yes.
You have got to be exceedingly careful.
Like, you have a target on your back, even if you aren't looking for anyone.
Yeah, you have got to be aware of that. If you are the slightest in any way, shape, or form vulnerable in any way, it's a given. The predators are going to be on you like a pack of wolves, all different types. And I hate to end our show on that negative note, but I think
it's the way of the world now.
What?
I said it is the way of the world now, though. Like this is legit.
This is real life.
Yeah, but the fact that you're going to be putting these links, including them for people, I think is a lovely service, and I'm so appreciative that you're doing that.
Absolutely. We
people-
try to do that whenever we can. Like if we are looking at a cult that has a website dedicated to helping
People
survivors
get out of that cult.
we always try to post those kinds of links. You know, you never know who could see it.
Yeah, that's very true. Very
Like,
true.
we're still growing, so we're just a little small community right now. But eventually, like we want to grow. We want to get this out to as many people as possible because this is the kind of stuff that matters. Talking about this, getting this out there, like trying to get people to pay attention, be more vigilant.
Yeah, it just takes 1 second. 1 second of looking like a victim. 1 second of being
Walking
vulnerable.
down the strip with a Walkman and not paying attention.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And being naive and moving to a big city and absolutely. Having your heart broken. Yeah.
And I know that I would be the perfect target. Seriously, like I would walk in, like if I were to go somewhere on vacation and just be hanging out, like I don't pay attention to nothing. I barely pay attention to where I'm walking, let alone anything else. And and that's how
It takes a split second. And I'm not saying live your life paranoid.
No, we're not trying to fear monger. It's just the reality of the situation. Like be mindful.
And I mean, I moved from I jumped from the fire pan, the frying pan into the fire. I went from Las Vegas, which, like that wasn't bad enough, to Hollywood.
The thick of it.
Yeah. And I was actually told, and this was a mind-boggling thing to me, if you're at the grocery store or anywhere or at the mall and you start heading out to your car and you see an unmarked van sitting next to the driver's side of your car, don't try to get in your car because those are kidnappers or sex traffickers, and they're going to throw the door open and grab you by the neck and pull you in and drive off, and you'll never be seen again. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done to my life? I mean, how do people live like this? Well, sure enough, I went to the grocery store one day and was walking out to the car with my little shopping cart, and there was an unmarked van parked next to my car on the driver's side, and I took my little cart and I went back in the store. And but the manager didn't care. It was like, oh, again, I mean, it's just another day in the parking lot.
Right.
And so I had to wait for him to leave because nobody was going to walk me out to my car. Nobody was going to take them on. Nobody was going to help me. So I had to sit there and wait for this van to go pick another victim so I could get in my car and drive home. And it's just the things you don't ever think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Carrie, for your time. We really appreciated the conversation. It was great. We look forward to reading Becoming Billie, the novel.
The novel, yes, make the difference. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
Girls, it was a joy to be with you. I really enjoyed this. Chrissy told me you were really a lot of fun and I was going to have a good time. And absolutely, that's true. I've enjoyed meeting you and I thank you for the opportunity. I hope something that we talked about today will be of use to your viewers out there, your listeners.
That's all we hope for too. If you guys made it to this far in the video, make sure you leave us a book emoji in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, make sure you share this video. We want it to get out to as many people as possible. We have some links in our description box for various organizations to help those that have been trafficked or that loved ones think that they have loved ones that have been trafficked. We just have various links below. Feel free to find those.
Make sure you check us out over on TikTok and Instagram. We post regularly on TikTok and occasionally go live over there as well.
And we will have all of Carrie's information below. And once her book is out, we will absolutely make sure you guys know so you can pick it up yourselves. And on that note,
Stay spooky, friends.